I have a personal criteria when it comes to my reviews. The most important one is that I have to beat the game at least once before I can make a full judgment of it. Roguelike games can be tricky to review under this criteria, because the only way to beat them and see the credits is to finish them in a single run. Dying or quitting the game means that you have to start over, and that's before we get into multiple endings, unlockables, and countless other little secrets on top of the games being known for being pretty challenging. Such is the case with Hard and Slash. I was originally going to make this game as part of another 3 indie games type of video, but as I kept playing the game to see how much it had to offer, suddenly I found myself figuring out the combat and surviving to the point I made it to the final boss. So I felt it would be more fair to give it a proper review. In Hard and Slash, we play as Hard, a little combat robot that was just going through the testing phases. Something suddenly went wrong in the facility, and the robopocalypse simply began. Many years later, you wake up alone with only one objective: to get out of the facility. And that's about it. The game has its fair share of blood, but you do have to go out of your way to get it, because the real meat and potatoes is in the gameplay. True to every roguelike out there, every room, every item, every weapon, and even enemies are randomized. You are never going to get the same run twice. This is greatly complemented with how this game does its own twist for the genre, much like its predecessors. Let's begin with the combat. The hack and slash portion of this game is simple, but is pretty satisfying as well. Although there is no combo counter, you can still juggle enemies around and hit them as hard as your weapons and equipment allow for it. Some enemies do take more damage than others, so your best choice is to alternate between your 3 main weapon slots. And here is where things start to get different. Defeating enemies award you with scrap metal that you can then use to buy upgrades for yourself, your armor, or even your weapons. While it's usually recommended to gather as much scrap as possible, it is also advised that you avoid fighting too much, as enemies can get increasingly tougher and it can be made more difficult due to the healing system. Because you see, there are 3 ways to heal in this game. Either by finding health drops in random rooms, taking them from enemies that have hearts on their heads, or by using the recycle system. If there is an item you don't need or you find one that is useless to you, you can recycle it. Recycling a full health will grant you extra hearts, but if you have taken damage, it will instead heal you. This creates a resource management of sorts, where if you have taken too much of a beating, you can search for items to recycle to heal yourself, or if the situation is too dire, you can recycle some of your own equipment to heal yourself. It creates an interesting sense of tension, as sometimes you might have to decide if you want to keep dodging danger or getting rid of an otherwise powerful item. So despite having a simpler kind of combat, the game will often put you into these adrenaline-fueled fights, where you will have to know when to attack and defend, and that is the mark of a good hack-and-slash game. What this game lacks in quantity of levels makes up for it in quality. Each of the 3 main levels are massive. There is plenty of branching paths, and depending on which one you take, you will face whichever boss is roaming around said area. They are always the same bosses, so that means you have to know which route to take if you want to fight a specific one, or sometimes end up in a completely different area altogether. Even though it's randomly generated, the levels of this game also carry a fantastic sense of escalation, going from the confined house of the laboratory, to the wide open streets of the city that can lead up to the buildings, or down to the drain, to the more climatic escalation of the final boss in a massive sky facility. The sense of adventure is constant in this game. True to any roguelike, and as I stated earlier, the game also carries multiple endings and secrets. You can just play the game normally and make it to the end just fine, but if you wish to, you can go out of your way to find secret side quests and challenges that will net you a completely different ending. The best part of this is, much like with every other roguelike, dying is not so bad. It doesn't matter how many times you lose, you are constantly making progress, either by unlocking new characters or discovering new weapons, and items based on which type of enemies you defeat or what challenges you complete. And because all of it comes out naturally as you play the game, you are always completing something new, and very often is without realizing it. If I were to list a negative so far, is that sometimes you may get overrun by enemies, or get cheap-shotted by some of the smaller ones, leading you to some random and a bit unfair deaths. There are certain types of bosses I'm not a fan of at all, especially on the boss side, since it takes a while to reach some of them and you can potentially die in 1 or 2 hits before you can realize the best way to fight them. But because you learn to avoid the routes that take to these bosses, it's very possible to avoid the frustration and just keep having fun exploring somewhere else. It also helps that the game has a little New Game Plus system of sorts. Every time you die, any scrap metal you didn't use is going to carry over with you to your next run. This means that if you are doing multiple runs and you've been dying a lot, you can have a lot of scrap metal on you and you can make yourself stronger from the get-go, and that will give you a much better edge in battle. If there's one other downside I can list, it will have to go to the platforming, especially in the city. There is areas where some items can be accessed only via the platforming, but because of the way the jumping system is implemented, jumping around can be tricky, and it can be made more frustrating if you are low on health. You don't take fall damage, but flying enemies can and will follow you if you are near their aggro range. But again, it is something that can be avoided if you are careful. Overall, Hard and Slash is a really good and very underrated roguelike. I don't think there's too many of these games that do the hack and slash genre, so this game deserves a lot of love, no pun intended. The plot is easy to follow and very interesting, and every new run is very fun to go through, because every weapon has its own combo system, so every time you play the game you are getting a new and different moveset. But of course, you do have to go with the idea that you will die a few times before you get a full understanding of the game and its mechanics. It is, after all, part of the course with roguelikes. Besides, this means the game offers many hours of replayability, and it's one of those where you can easily just choose new game and jump right into the action. That is why I'm giving Hard and Slash a very hearty and well-deserved 9 out of 10. If you are a fan of the hack and slash genre, then this game is made just for you. It's cute, it's charming, but it also has a lot of moments full of adrenaline. Plus, it does bring you a lot of satisfaction when you clear the more difficult parts and realize you finally got good.